Australia, the land down under. A land of many frontiers. A land like the United States, fertile, rich with promise for the pioneer. For this land, too, was opened by a hardy breed of men and women who, like Americans, carved homes out of the wilderness and dared to build on their dreams. Today, Australians and Americans share similar ways. Above all, they share the common aspiration of freedom. The bonds of Australian-American friendship were cemented strongly during World Wars I and II and in the Korean War, conflicts in which Australians and New Zealanders played valiant roles. But one of the strongest links in the chain of friendship binding our two great nations was forged during World War II, the Battle of the Coral Sea. It was a strange battle, a battle of aircraft carriers and their planes, Japanese against combined US, Australian and New Zealand forces. The stakes, Port Moresby and Tulagi, bases coveted by Japan to mount an offensive against the Australian mainland. We inflict heavy losses on the enemy. Our own losses are heavier. Though the Coral Sea battle is a tactical victory for the Japanese, it is a strategic victory for us. The Japanese thrust at mainland Australia is turned aside. The way is paved for General MacArthur's return to the Philippines. The Battle of the Coral Sea becomes history, but its significance to Australians and Americans is deep and far-reaching. To perpetuate the historic event, a Coral Sea Commemoration sponsored by the Australian-American Association and the Australian government has been held annually since 1950. Each year, the United States is invited to send a distinguished military representative to the ceremonies in Australia and New Zealand. In 1961, the invitation is extended to General Herbert B. Powell, Commanding General, United States Continental Army Command. On April 19, 1961, General Powell and Mrs. Powell leave on their journey from CONARC headquarters at Fort Monroe, Virginia, where General Powell directs one of the largest military training establishments in the world. At Langley Field, Major General L.L. Doane, CONARC Chief of Staff, and his wife say goodbye to the goodwill envoys. En route, a stop at Hawaii. Hickam Field, And a greeting to the General and Mrs. Powell from Commander-in-Chief, U.S. Army Pacific, General James F. Collins and Mrs. Collins. A visit to Army Pacific Headquarters at Fort Shafter. General Powell, accompanied by General Collins, inspects a guard of honor. Introductions follow as General Collins presents members of his staff and their wives to the distinguished visitors. Next, a stop at Camp Smith, headquarters U.S. Forces Pacific. Admiral Harry D. Felt escorts General Powell to the stand for a Marine Guard review. Now, westward across the Pacific to the first stop on General Powell's schedule of Coral Sea ceremonies, the Australian capital, Canberra. The city was first occupied officially as the seat of the Australian government in 1927. Carefully controlled development plans have excluded commercial and industrial facilities, except for essential services. At Canberra's airport, a welcome to the land down under from the Honorable J.O. Kramer, Minister of the Army, and U.S. Ambassador William J. Sebald. Greetings also from Group Captain R.N. Dalkin, Royal Australian Air Force Base Commander. A guard of honor from the Royal Military College at Duntroon adds a colorful touch to the proceedings. At Duntroon, General Powell is greeted by Commandant Major General Knights and his staff. A veteran infantry commander, General Powell is at home with his military colleagues. While at Duntroon, General Powell will present a plaque on behalf of cadets from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. After a brief inspection tour, General Powell begins a day of ceremonials in Canberra. This memorial to United States servicemen in the Pacific in World War II was dedicated by Queen Elizabeth in 1954. General Powell arrives at the Australian War Memorial, one of Canberra's most imposing structures. Here is enshrined the memory of the Aussies, those courageous fighting men who left a mark on history from the Gallipoli Peninsula in World War I to the waters of the Coral Sea and the hills of Korea. While in Canberra, General Powell, accompanied by Ambassador Sebald, pays his respects to the Prime Minister of Australia, the Right Honourable R.G. Menzies. General Powell confers with Lieutenant General R.G. Pollard, Chief of the General Staff, Australian Army. Northward now to another great Australian city, Brisbane. Brisbane was the site of General MacArthur's headquarters during World War II. Coral Sea Commemoration ceremonies continue at Brisbane's Anzac Square. Personnel from U.S. naval units take part in the proceedings. Each major city, in cooperation with the Australian American Association, has arranged its own official Coral Sea celebration, coinciding with General Powell's itinerary. Morning tea at Lennon's Hotel on Brisbane's famed Gold Coast. Then off to Springbrook for a day of relaxation as guests of the Australian American Association. A wholesome influence for peace in this vitally important Pacific region, the Australian American Association works constantly toward the unity of the great English-speaking nations. Encouragement of permanent individual friendships plays a direct part in promoting cooperation between the two countries. Here's one place where a steak fry is as good as a treaty. Southward next to the national metropolis, Sydney. Approximately 1/5 of Australia's 10 million people live in the Greater Sydney area. It is one of the oldest cities in the Commonwealth and a significant educational and cultural center. In Sydney, General Powell, interviewed by press and television, described some of his responsibilities as head of the United States Continental Army Command. General and Mrs. Powell, accompanied by Flag Officer Rear Admiral G.C. Oldham, board a Royal Australian Navy barge for a tour of Sydney's world-famous harbour. Sydney's excellent port facilities handle the bulk of Australia's foreign trade and have helped make the city the nation's dominant transportation, commercial and financial centre. In Sydney, General and Mrs. Powell were honoured guests of the association at the magnificent Coral Sea Victory Ball. A short hop northward for Coral Sea ceremonies at Newcastle. General and Mrs. Powell arrive at Williamtown Royal Australian Air Force Base. Group Captain W.E. Townsend, base commander, welcomes the visitors. Mr. B.L. Gosper, president of the Newcastle sub-branch of the Australian American Association, and Mrs. Gosper present local branch members to the General and his wife. Newcastle is a leading industrial center in the Commonwealth. Situated on the fringe of large coal fields, the city has the largest iron and steel works in the Southern Hemisphere. At the War Memorial, troops from C Company, 2nd Battalion Australian Engineers, and units of the Royal Australian Air Force form a guard of honour for Newcastle's Coral Sea tribute. westward to one of the leading ports of the Commonwealth, Adelaide. Adelaide is the automobile manufacturing centre of Australia. The climate here is similar to that of Los Angeles, an ideal place for a day at the races. At Morfettville Racetrack, the General enjoys a brief interlude from official ceremonies. Chairman of the South Australian Jockey Club, Mr. Clifford Reid, accompanies General Powell on a tour of the grounds. Next, the largest and most important city in Western Australia, Perth. Perth is the state capital and a transportation centre. A call at Government House to meet His Excellency Sir John Dwyer, Lieutenant Governor of Western Australia. Leaving with General Powell is Mr. C.W. Court, Minister of Industrial Development and Minister of Railways. At St. George's Terrace, General Powell is reviewing officer for the Coral Sea Services Parade. Fighting men from down under, who faced great dangers side by side with Americans in 3 wars during this century, to win for mankind the freedoms both nations treasure, bonds forged in the heat and stress of battle. General Powell leaves St. George's Terrace for a civic reception at Town Hall. In Perth, as in other cities, General Powell will speak at various Coral Sea ceremonials. Now to the second largest city in Australia, Melbourne, one of the Commonwealth's leading manufacturing centres. With a population of almost 2 million, Melbourne was formerly the capital of Australia, and many departments of the Commonwealth government are still located there. Outside Melbourne Town Hall, General Powell, with Administrator of Victoria Sir Charles Lowe, takes the salute of the Coral Sea Services March. Australian soldiers wear a new style helmet, similar to that worn by American fighting men. A mutual defense system under the ANZUS Treaty links Australia, New Zealand, and the United States for protection of common interests. At Rock of Remembrance Shrine, the General pays tribute to fallen warriors. A shrine for the living, too, who must take up the cause of freedom and give it meaning through unity and determination. A brief visit to the island state of Tasmania and its capital city, Hobart. With its temperate climate, parks, and fine drives, and a good spring water supply, Hobart is a favorite summer resort for Australians. General and Mrs. Powell are met at Lanherne Airport by the Honorable John J. Dwyer, Minister of Agriculture, and other welcoming officials and dignitaries. From their car, the visitors see the famous floating concrete bridge of Hobart. General Powell again pays homage to the fallen at the Hobart Memorial. The presence of a distinguished American military leader at the annual Coral Sea ceremonies is a rededication of our country to the trust inherited by us from those for whom these memorials were raised. Next, an official visit to Auckland, New Zealand, another great member of the British Commonwealth. Auckland is the shipping and communication hub for northern New Zealand and a center for processing of the nation's extensive dairy trade. General Powell is met at the Whanuapai Air Force Station in Auckland by Group Captain A.P. Gainsford, Base Commander, Mr. R.D. Muldoon, Member of Parliament representing the Government of New Zealand, and various government officials. At Auckland War Memorial, a tribute to another great ally. A visit to the capital of New Zealand at Wellington. Wellington Airport, and official greetings from Major General L.W. Thornton, Chief of the General Staff, and other officers. In Wellington, General Powell meets the Prime Minister of New Zealand, the Honourable Keith Holyoake. Accompanying the General is Miss Ruth Bacon, American Chargé d'Affaires for the area. General Powell's schedule of Coral Sea ceremonies took him to the major cities of Australia and New Zealand. In each, he found friendship and trust. In each, the memory of Australian-American sacrifice struck a dominant and recurring note. Coral Sea ceremonies at Fremantle War Memorial symbolized the true meaning of General Powell's visit. A meaning expressed by the General in a speech at the Coral Sea dinner in Perth. We are here to commemorate an event which provides striking evidence just how powerful our efforts can be when we act together. To us in the United States, and to you here, the Coral Sea is a symbol of the bond between us. Although the Coral Sea is of the past, the bond lives and must never be shaken. In remembrance of that great moment in our common history, we pledge ourselves to stand side by side through all the years to come, certain of the righteousness of our cause and the timelessness of our friendship as partners for peace.